First, introduce our moderator, Sarah Yang. Sarah Yang is our IT and security director. Sarah joined us about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and she has been doing incredible job on our website. So thank you, Sarah. I worked with Sarah at Target maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and then she's a very good person. She has a good character, and when I thought about having somebody work in help us in the IT space, she was the one that I thought about, and she was proving that she was the right person. So Sarah, you got the floor.
Thank you, Mamadi. Very flattering. Awesome. Okay, so I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today, Mohy Omer. He is a Sudanese American who moved to the States after living in the world's largest refugee camp in Kenya. Mr. Omar has more than 8 years of work experience in the field of international development, U.S. foreign policy, and diplomacy. Currently, he's the policy analyst for East and Southern Africa at the U.S. Commission of International Religious Freedoms, or USCIRF. Prior to that, he worked at the National Democratic Institute as a program officer for the Middle East and North Africa team. He's also worked for the United States Institute of Peace, where he coordinated the Youth Leaders Program, and he's also worked for U.S. Senator Heidi Heitkamp in Fargo, North Dakota, and in Washington, D.C. While working for Senator Heitkamp, he concentrated on researching and writing on foreign affairs, national security, and defense issues. He's also the founder of the Sudan Task Force in Washington, D.C., an initiative aimed at articulating to the U.S. government and non-governmental actors the importance of greater U.S. involvement in Sudan. He holds a bachelor's in political science from North Dakota State University and a master's in international relations from Syracuse University. So I think I can speak for all of us that we're super excited to.
Okay, I said the same sentiment.
He will be talking to us about the importance of grassroots movement in the age of uncertainties, which we have plenty of in today's day. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to you, Mohy.
Good. So
yeah, absolutely. Could you hear me well?
Sure.
Yep.
But I want to stop sharing here so that way it's we'll have.
Yeah. Well, that's great. First of all, thanks for having me, and it's great to be with you all. And Mamadou, thank you for putting this together and also initiating this organization to bring together professionals from different backgrounds to support each other and to connect and to learn from each other. I think it's a much needed work, and I commend that. And I thank you for initiating the idea, as well as everyone who's working with you in this specific organization. And Sarah, thank you for the wonderful introduction, as well as your efforts to promote this organization and support this noble effort. So what an interesting time that we live in the US. It's really fascinating given everything that is happening. And in addition to the political climate, the COVID, the pandemic that just has swept out the world and has changed a lot of things that we know about a lot of things, right? It's really a fascinating time from the perspective that it's not just challenging the status quo, the traditional status quo, but it's just introducing new challenges that we have to grapple with every single day. So for this specific webinar or meeting, or however you classify it, and the topic, actually, to begin with, I don't have much experience actually in, I'm not an expert of grassroots movements. However, I have participated based on my own, situation growing up in Sudan. And in Sudan, we had one of the most brutal dictators. And when I was in high school, I participated in protests and we were jailed. And so from that experience, I have something to share with you, as well as my work in international development. Actually, before international development, in Fargo, North Dakota, when I arrived there, we also worked with local organizations, and we try to also kind of bring together the new Americans, is what we call them, refugees and immigrants coming from different parts of the world and settled there. And Fargo is very unique in a sense that it's just it's a city that historically been very homogeneous, and then suddenly with the oil boom, the fabric of the city changed because a lot of immigrants were brought to the city. And then also you have a lot of people moving out of coming from different states because of the economy was good. I think North Dakota was the second best economy in the world. They had about like $16 billion surplus at some point. So that kind of recruited a lot of people from different parts of the state, and suddenly the city was changing, and there was conflict between the locals and the new arrivals. So we have participated in that as well. But let me begin. So based on that, and in addition to my work in the international development field, working for international organizations such as USIP, NDI, and then now working for the US government as a foreign policy analyst. So just a quick background that I have when it comes to this specific topic that is introduced. So I will be tackling it from that perspective. I have no academic background when it comes to this specific topic. And I actually have a good recommendation. One of my colleagues, Maria Stefan, she is well known for being the person when it comes to this topic specifically. She's written books, and she is working at USIP. She's leading a whole department at USIP. It's called Nonviolent Movement Action. So she's leading that department, and I would be more than happy to invite her. But I think the best place to begin with this is that let's just take a quick look at why some grassroots movements succeed while others fail. Maybe that's the place that we can start, and then we could have it as a discussion. I think it's a lot better if we could kind of back and forth. So I think this is really related to where we are today, and it gives us a very good context of why some social movements and grassroots movements fail, some succeed. Let's look at the structure to begin with. I could use a few examples as well during this presentation, is that let's look at why they succeed. There are, I think, specific aspects to why grassroots movements succeed. One, let's look at the structural, leadership of these movements. We can take any example. Let's say the Black Lives Matter or Me Too, hashtag Me Too movement, or all of that, like the gun rights or the gun education, all of that. We can take them and basically look at the structural factors of these organizations and see which ones succeeded and why they succeeded in the way they succeeded. I think one very clear factor is that we talk about leadership, effective leadership. And when we say effective leadership, I think we're attaching a few values to this very specific word or very specific definition. Number one, I think successful leaders or effective leaders always try to find a way to empower people around them to create more leaders. Not just, we see the opposite in like where I came from and in many countries, in Sudan, for example. If you are in charge of something, instead of empowering people, the system is built to make sure that no one gets to the point where they could challenge you. Actually, effective leadership is the exact opposite. If you would want it to succeed in building a grassroots movement and empower people, then you need to make sure that you are creating leaders within your own circle, meaning empowering people to achieve their best. And you always encourage them, work with them, build their capacities to be in a place that is even better than you, because the commitment is not to an individual. The commitment is to an idea, right? I wanted to achieve X. The Black Lives Matter movement, for example, they have very concrete objective and very clear goal, which is we are going to challenge this specific system, the policing system that has always been putting Black people and minorities in this situation. So having that, and then everyone who's working towards that cause is empowered, not challenged. So that way you prevent this idea of the organization or whatever body you're working in. You see a lot of splits. For example, I could use a few examples in Kenya. I lived in Kenya for some time too, Sudan as well is that you see political parties is splitting into a few political parties, right? And when you really look at why they split, the split was mainly based on personalities. And you see that actually across many, many situations, not just organizations or political parties, even government institutions. In some, when I was at NDI, I worked on the Tunisia portfolio. And in Tunisia, as you know, they had a government that is democratic, and they had an election earlier this year, and they had a split parliament. No single political party won. So they have to work together to build a coalition to form a government. And actually about 2 weeks ago, the government collapsed. And the reason is that actually the parties that formed the coalition, that formed the government, ideally they agree on the goals. However, they did not like the individuals who were kind of in charge, and conflict erupted between these individuals. And instead of finding a way to empower each other, to work together, to support each other, and then try to achieve those noble goals that we all agree on in theory, but rather the conflict was around individuals. So I think effective leadership plays a huge role in succeeding or failing specific aspects when it comes to grassroots movements. And then the second thing is, you're already working on, your organization is a good example of this, is building coalition of like-minded people, beginning with, when you're building a coalition, obviously the best place to start is by identifying people who agree with your cause, and then trying to galvanize these people, and then bring one of the elements I mentioned earlier about effective leadership is to empower each party to the coalition to achieve their objective, right? Because ultimately achieving their objective would advance and enhance your own objective. So building coalition would be the second part of, and great leaders are well known to do that, right? Barack Obama, for example, before he became president in Chicago, that's what he was known for. A community organizer has the ability to bring together like-minded people and expand that pool to even beyond people who are just passionate about the topic that you're introducing. That is a character that a good leader could exhibit, right? So thinking about that. And then in addition, I think one of the reasons why people get involved in these causes is, if I see the Black Lives Movement movement, for example, you have people who have lived experiences of this unjust system of racism, people who went to jail for nothing, someone who died on the street because of $20 dispute. We all watch that, right? If you have people who have the experience, the lived experience, and advancing the cause, you have a better chance of recruiting and galvanizing support behind your cause. And then also I would add to that a few other elements, is like having concrete goal. As we mentioned, the Black Lives Matter movement is just, we wanted to dismantle this racist police system, right? Policing system in America. That's a very concrete goal, and they are going after it. The more clear objectives and goals you have, I think the better equipped you are to achieve your goals. And then also, in addition to that, obviously commitment and consistency. A lot of movements start with this noble idea, and they react to a current situation, and as time passes by, the energy just winds and they dissolve. And I think the reason is because whether the leadership or whatever within the organization, they dislike this commitment to the cause, and they're not consistent with their mission. I think the perfect example is Congressman John Lewis. He just passed away last week, and he was the youngest to participate in the March in Washington with Martin Luther King in the 60s, and he became a member of Congress, and he had never changed his position on civil rights issues. He was the most consistent representative, in addition to obviously Bernie Sanders in US Congress, has always been consistent. This is what he's fighting for. Regardless of the situation, he would continue to fight. Be consistent, commit to the cause of your organization. So the examples that you laid out earlier, Mamadou, like your organization's mission, the vision, the value that you wanted to embody, all of this, if you exhibit this in your daily practice, I think you are in a position to recruit more people to join your organization and to join your cause, obviously, not just your organization. And then also, again, this is the harder thing I worked in the US Congress to do, is like building consensus. And this is, I don't know, this is really fascinating. I would love to hear what you guys, your input on this. Sometimes people would agree with everything you're saying. They take position to agree with to disagree with the position because you took that position or you initiated that position. I don't know how you could have reached, for example, the Republicans and Democrats, so many issues, they actually agree on that. When Obama introduced the Obamacare, or the affordable health, whatever it was called, Affordable Healthcare Act. Yeah. So that one, when he introduced that, actually the idea was it was Republican, actually. Governor Romney, when he was in the 90s, governor, introduced that idea in Massachusetts, right? It's implemented there. It's their idea. But because it was coming from him and it would score political points and all of that, a lot of people took a position and just did not vote with him on that. I was in Congress back then. So it's interesting to see how this, I understand the political calculation, but even in regular interactions, simple interactions, sometimes people would fully disagree with the position with you, not because they disagree with the position, but because you are the initiator of this position, so they would disagree with that. I don't know how you could approach that. Maybe being a little bit humble when you introduce these ideas would be helpful. Or trying to not attach yourself to the cause that you're, I don't know, it's fascinating, but this is something that psychologists and sociologists, I think, need to grapple with. And then also, I would add to that and say diversifying your kind of target audience is starting with people who agree with you, but also expanding your pool of targeted audience beyond people who would just disagree with you. For example, Mamadou, in Minneapolis, you are starting with the communities of immigrants, whether they're Africans or Asians or Latin Americans. You're starting there, but ultimately, I think you also need to include the host community, right? People who've been here for generations. You could start with people who could support your cause from, I don't know, maybe they would start relating to it by looking at their parents came from somewhere, or their grandparents, and then you would expand your pool of kind of targeted audience from that perspective. Obviously, you would start with those who would agree with you, and then you go into like the policymakers and business leaders, as well as community leaders from different parts of the city, and you expand your movement. So I think these are the elements that I think help with kind of, movements, grassroots movements specifically, succeed and be part of the discussion. And then the final point I would add is, and this is extremely important, is that grassroots movements always try to target not just policy change, also trying to change a norm, right? So the idea that police officers, white police officers, internalize if they're going after a Black man at my age or your age in a different way than they could approach another, let's say, a white male of the same age. It's almost becoming a culture, right, within that environment, and the society at large tolerates that, right? So when you're trying to change this type of behavior, it's not just your target. You're not just going to target the policy. It's important to kind of initiate these policy changes, but also it's important to try to challenge the very status quo from this norm perspective, from cultural perspective, just from this attitude perspective. It's extremely important. They say, well, change hearts and minds of people, right? In the 60s, the debate was that a lot of congressmen and women and senators and governors, even presidents, debated that, well, you cannot legislate morality. It turned out to be wrong, actually, because ultimately the general narrative is created by power, and that power doesn't have to be just a political power, right? So you have to find a way to kind of be part of that discussion. From my personal capacity as a U.S. government official, I'm not allowed to participate in any political campaign, but I also work from my free time. I advise Joe Biden on their foreign policy towards the countries that I work on. And actually, we had an event this last week about engaging the diaspora community, like the African diaspora, if there is such a thing. What is the African diaspora community? There isn't one. Obviously, that's why your organization came to existence. So the point I'm trying to connect to this one is that we had this lengthy debate about like, so what is the strategy? Who are we targeting, and how are we going to target them, and why are we targeting them? And all of the elements that I mentioned earlier is incorporated because we have a targeted audience we would like to reach out to, but so we have to organize ourselves in a specific way to achieve these objectives. So I think they're somehow related. And then finally, I would say this building an organization, I have nothing to say about that, even though this is one of the questions, Mamadou, you sent me, because you already have established an organization, and you could perhaps walk us like through the process by which you have established this specific organization. To me, I was also part of this USA Hello organization. It's a technology organization that was created actually to do similar to what you're doing. Is basically they build a platform to provide access to resources, connecting refugees, immigrants, newcomers, all of that with local resources. Is the idea of like how they can familiarize themselves with the system. So I think that organization, it started one person. Within a year, it became $1 million organization. And I was honored to kind of become the board chairman for that organization. My term just ending this year. But I think the reason why that organization succeeded is the commitment of the leadership, and that's what they're passionate about. So I think one thing I would mention when it comes to building a movement, an organization, is really to find people who are passionate about the cause. You also give a perfect example. Sometimes you go beyond our immediate environment to look at perfect things, but sometimes, perfect things are just around us. You said you run into Sarah at Target, and now she's working with you and building up this platform, and she's part of your organization, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just like that. It's as simple as that. Identifying and finding people who are passionate about the cause, have the ability, the skills. Even if they don't have the skills, they're willing to learn, to support you, to go forward. I think these are the things that we definitely need to focus on when we're kind of starting grassroots organizations or movements. The final example, I'm personally connected to this, that I'm going to share is, I know we can open it up, is look at the pro-gun movement and then the anti-gun movement in America. The pro-gun movement is obviously winning. The NRA people type, they're winning 100% in America. And here's why I think. Actually, there is a study about this, is that the pro-gun movement in America had a very clear objective, and their target audience is the grassroots, right? They kind of ignore this law because the policymakers and all of that, because they felt they're protected in the Constitution, the Second Amendment rights and all that. But their focus was basically on communities, right? They worked on local level engagement, and that's what they do until today. And then the anti-gun movement in America focused their entire efforts on the elites, government, US Congress, the president, to legislate. And that's their focus. They failed to kind of mobilize the American public and work this from bottom-up approach to try to educate the public. And today, if you run a poll, more than 90% of Americans would say, actually, we are for very sensible gun control legislation. We support that. We support it, right? But when you come to Congress, it's not happening, because the difference is that, the reason why is that you have this gun movement, their entire focus is we're going to work with policymakers, U.S. Congress to change the law. And these pro-gun people are working on the communities and trying to make the case for why their rights should be protected to buy a gun or to. So you see, and they're succeeding. And I think if you reverse it, if these pro-gun people started also to work from the bottom up, educate the American public and engage them in the process, I think they would be a bit more successful than what they're doing right now. But this is a political issue. I get that. It's an interesting topic, but in terms of why one side of the cause is succeeding while the other side is not succeeding is a very good lesson that we can learn from. So I hope this is just a general quick kind of elements that are related to how and why some movements, succeed and some fail from my personal experience. So I hope that was helpful.
Sarah?
I think we can maybe open up into some Q&A. I have a few questions or things that I would like to, some points that I'd like to ask about. So maybe I can start. One thing I want to ask is there, so you talked a little bit about, how diversifying your target audience can help your grassroots movement continue to grow and keep its momentum. Have you? Can there be? And then your second point, you also mentioned there's. It's important to be able to build consensus. So I wonder, like, is there like a life cycle of grassroots movements where your grassroots movement starts to, you diversify your target audience, you start to grow, but then maybe that's where people who are still dedicated to the same cause, they may actually disagree with what is the most effective way to pursue our cause. One example of this, I think, I can't remember exactly, I was trying to search this up and confirm, but I think like the Me Too movement split off into Women's March, right? They clearly, I think, have like pretty much the same cause that they're committed to, but it seems like they disagree about the approach or like how to most effectively create change. So is that like a normal part of what happens when grassroots movements grow really big? Is that something that should be like we should try to avoid, that like maybe the goal is to take a grassroots movement and grow it big enough and like keep all of your interested parties still like united under one movement? Like, is that or maybe it's perfectly fine for grassroots movements to splinter off. Maybe there's still just as much, maybe that format can still affect as much change as one big movement can. What's your take on that?
No, this is really, it's fascinating. You're definitely right. It's really difficult to do that. I think what would be helpful is that just stating what your organization stands for, very clear. For example, the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of young Black men are fed up and they're like, we are going to destroy things. I participated in protests in Washington, D.C., and some were destroying cars, and others would run into them and fight with them saying, no, this is a non-violent movement. We are not going to do this. And then you have just groups looking at them and effing them, right? They're like, no, this is how we're going to do it. So definitely you would have that disagreement along the way, but I think what would be helpful is clearly stating your goal. This is what we stand for. This is what we do. Some people do crazy things that don't feel like it doesn't fit into what we do, but we, like the Donald Trump, for example, the KKK, David Duke supported him, obviously, and he would come out and say, hey, I don't need his support, that's fine, I don't care, but I don't endorse what he's doing, type thing, right? So things like that, just stating what you stand for is I think would be really extremely important. But to your point, sometimes you got me thinking that sometimes actually it's good to splinter off and build different, networks rather than just one single network, because it will become too powerful that in itself could create some challenges, maybe kind of I don't know, spreading it out would be one way to kind of avoid that. So yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Because the other, I think, potential downside to growing too large or having too diversified of a scope is that it's maybe then it is harder to like be effective with one piece of your mission. So actually with WeNetworkNow, one of the I've been talking to Mamadi a little bit about this, about how every person's experience is so different, even if they fall into the same category, right? So I was sharing
Right.
my experience as an Asian American. You can take me. So I was born here, and my parents immigrated here. My experience is going to be different from someone who comes here in their 20s for college, and someone who an Asian person who was adopted into a white family here. We're
Right.
three of us. We all fall under the Asian American category, but very different experiences. So, can one movement or organization cater to all three of those experiences and be effective? Or can that even be a grassroots movement, or do you need to grow into a larger organization to be able to address those three very different experiences, those three different like sets of struggles and challenges that each like persona will have? So yeah, I don't what and I think that goes back to your point about having very clear goals, right? Because maybe for someone who is, I think back to my own use case, where if I am seeking out, maybe if I feel like I lack support in XYZ organization from my specific experience as a child of an immigrant, maybe I can just seek that out in a different organization, some organization that is very targeted and narrow in their scope there. So yeah, that's one thing that I was thinking about too when you mentioned diversifying, but also keeping a clear goal, is that it seems like you definitely need a balance. You need to be able to keep those in balance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for sharing that, for sure.
People, please feel free to put your questions in chat, or if you want to just ask them.
Yeah,
go ahead.
So my name is Gildas Kabore, and I wanted to thank you for sharing your story and your experiences. Also, my question, I just wanted to take it back to we're talking policy and how ideally you would want to go beyond a policy change and implement a change in the norms. So my question is, how do you do that? Is it in the way you write the policy, or basically how do you do that? And do you think it's responsibility of policy makers to be the advocates that changing the norm?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Gildas. Yeah, thank you, Gildas, for your question. This is a very good question. Yeah, definitely. In America, we are very obsessed, obviously, with this pop culture. It's not just from a musical perspective with the fame, right? Whoever is famous could have huge impact. For example, in the 80s, when the AIDS, HIV started to kind of swap out the gay community, the general perception was basically we had very conservative government, and people are saying, well, during Reagan era, they're like, well, these are people who oppose God, and so they're like, this is God is punishing them type thing. It was a stigma, right? But since famous people from Hollywood, an extremely wealthy individual, joined the cause and became in the forefront, and even Princess Diana, when she visited the States, she went to the hospital and she picked a kid who was born to a family that had HIV. So the perception was that, well, if you touch someone, even if you come close to them, it's like the coronavirus right now, you're going to contract it, right? It's just a myth. It wasn't supported by any evidence. But since people who are really respected in their communities stepped up and said, hey, this is not how it works actually. That kind of shifted the norm and shifted kind of the attitude towards that specific cause, right? And then in addition to that, the celebrities and wealthy individuals join for whatever reason. And that kind of helped to shift the discussion. And I think the same is true to any social cause. You could have policymakers or even local heroes in your community, could jump into it and support it. And that would change the hearts and minds of many people. The policy side of things is important, but enforcement and this kind of discussion one-on-one, Sarah is sharing her experience as, first generation American, and her parents are immigrants, right? And then you have someone who's adapted. How do you reconcile all of these differences by us talking together, right? So, I mean, there are different techniques and tactics you could use to advance that specific cause. And I don't know if there's one single, right answer to that. It depends on your context, depends on your strategy, it depends on all of that. But you're definitely right, Gildas. You could have policymakers, like for example, Barack Obama now, he's engaged in a lot of social activities that he cares about. And this is how he's going to elevate all of that. And even some African causes, African leaders, he's trying to build leaders for tomorrow. And not just in Africa, in Asia also, I think he's deeply engaged in that matter. The fact that he's the one that is leading it would have a huge impact rather than me or you, someone who's not well known to, these two continents. And so there are different ways you could advance that cause, but I would say, yes, begin there.
Okay. So basically, it is a work from the multiple actors to make that change happen. So I don't know, but I'm gonna kind of quickly ask my second question here. You also talked about commitment and consistency, and I just want to play the devil's advocate here by saying that consistency can be so hard, and when you mentioned Bernie Sanders and other senators, and when you think of Bernie, for instance, he has been very consistent, like you say. However, you wonder if that consistency pays off, because when you think about all the things that he's been talking about through the pandemic, we are seeing that the ideas that he's been promoting all these years were quote unquote the correct ones. But for some reason, he's never able to go beyond the level of senators and have all the necessary powers to implement those things. So how do you, when you talk about consistency and you look up to him and you don't see the results of his work, how do you remain committed and consistent?
Absolutely. Great question. So the very idea, so America is an idea, right? When the founding fathers kind of put this country together, they had an idea. This idea of Martin Luther King described it amazingly well. He said the arc of justice is long, but ultimately bends towards, justice, right? So when they were fighting, you could take any example, anyone, those historical leaders, and say, actually, there are two things. One, your vision, what you're fighting for, your cause, and seeing how that materializes as time passes by. And it's only going to materialize if you are committed and stay consistent to advance that cause. Otherwise, it would not. So yes, ultimate change takes time. You would see part of your success. Bernie Sanders, the fact that is socialist Democrat in the birthplace of capitalism, would become the main nominee of the main party. At least he was this close to clinching the nomination. That is a huge success. the fact that he became a senator and became one of the most influential senators, that's a huge success. He has laid the ground for people who are committed to the cause and to carry on, right? So this idea of all of us are working towards a more perfect union. So you're right. You don't live to see all of the fruits of what you have been working towards ultimately, but it will get there, right? When Martin Luther King says, I've been to the mountaintop and I have seen the promised land, and then he would say, I might not be able to get there with you, but I know us as a nation will get there, right? So that's the idea. It's a continuation. You lay the ground and someone picks up and continues, but with this consistency and commitment. And you're right, if you are advocating for something you wanted to change and see change during your lifetime, then maybe you wouldn't be successful from that perspective. But from the cause perspective, this general idea, I think it's definitely doable.
Good. Thank you so much for your time. I just want to remind everyone of the time. So it's like 1:53. Let's shoot for 1:05 just to be respectful of everyone's time. So if you have any other question, I will save mine. Unless no one has any question, then I will ask mine. But if you have any question, please feel free to ask then. No question, then I will ask mine then. All right, so Mohy, thank you. Your take on this topic is a phenomenal. I mean, I've been writing a lot. Thank you for your time. It's been really enlightening to hear your perspective on this topic. I want to ask you this. So this is based in light of my political science history classes. I remember a few things. But if you take the 60s and 70s, you had the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King, and that sacrifice himself in order to fight for justice, in order for us today, I mean black in general, to enjoy the voting right or to even go to school, to get a higher education, you and me, right? But I can go even farther than talk about George Washington as well, who actually went against the status quo during the American Revolution, right? To come out to build this great nations, right? But my question is, in the 21st century, young people as well, based on my experience, it's no longer sexy to be engaged in a grassroots movement because it doesn't pay off financially, right? We live in a very, at least from my opinion, a very instant gratification society now. I want it now. And what do you say to those folks that say, hey, you know what, movement is where everything starts. The politicians just gonna pass the law. They're gonna look at us. They are the mediator, right? Everything started. You talk about the gun movement, right? Of NRA, right? They started grassroots movement. So what do you say to those young people that say, you know what, this doesn't pay financially, and I might have some people that want to dislike me at work, because of something that say that goes against my manager or my boss or whatever. What do you say to those young people?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the challenge, right? So the perfect example is that Barack Obama, when he graduated from Harvard, he was offered, amazing jobs, Wall Street Journal in Washington, the Wall Street, obviously in New York, to be a lawyer for this huge, successful trillion-dollar companies. And he had a goal. He said, this is not what I wanted to do. I am going to be a community organizer in the south part of Chicago. He was paid like $30,000 per year, and this is a Harvard graduate. So ultimately, not everyone would want to do this kind of work. And that's why people who wanted to do this kind of work, they should be committed to it, right? They should be consistent. They should have this very clear vision. They should. And from my experience, there are those who are committed to this because ultimately they're motivated by the cause. And the interesting thing is you don't have to do this full time, right? I could do I am part of different causes. I work full-time job here in DC as a government official from 8 in the morning to 5 p.m., but I do have my own other causes that I support. I decide how I can get engaged, how I could support that. That's one thing. The second thing is that I would say if you have a huge cause like the one you're working on or the Me Too movement, then you need to establish an organization. If you do that, you need to recruit funding. There are a lot of sources. It's crazy. USA Hello, I was a board member. I actually joined that organization, and it was one-person effort, and suddenly we became this $1 million organization because we identified the sources that could support us. Now we can hire full-time staff, right? So these are the two things. I mean, individual motivation, and then also trying to identify resources where you could incentivize people who could dedicate more time to your organization.
Fantastic. I think we are out of time here. Mamadi, do you want to give any closing statements or any updates about what's upcoming? And if you're talking right now, you're on mute. I'm not sure if you're talking right now.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
All right, super. Thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to really thank our speaker, Mohy, here. Like I said earlier, your take on this issue, it was right on point. So thank you for your time. We would love to have you again for another topic. So please don't be a stranger. And we are new in this field, right? We are learning as we go. And we had a board meeting earlier this morning, and with our board member, we were all talking about, wow, in the last 7 months, we have learned a lot, actually, and those learning, it cannot be quantified, right? So thank you. And for closing statement here, if you guys can see my screen here, I'm gonna go here. Question, we already did that. So we have the upcoming event, and I will be sending out a communication about that. So basically it's about resume writing, right? So I know I'm not an expert in this, and right now, based on my experience, at least, you have AI and machine learning actually pre-selecting the resumes of people before they even get to the desk of a recruiter, right? So we are honored to be collaborating with a recruiter for a target. They're going to be joining us on 2 weeks from now to give us some tips, right, on how to write a winning resume. So, mark your calendar. There will be somebody will be reaching out pretty soon to all of you guys to give you more details. And also, we are thinking about 2 possible fundraising events, and one is going to be a soccer game, and another one is going to be movie in the theater, right? So obviously, we need some funding in order to, put events together, such like this. And we thought that a soccer game would be outside, would be safer, would be providing a hand sanitizer on a max than having an event inside. So more to come on that. The dates and the location is to be determined. We are still working on the logistics about that. And you can find us on these platforms. And Sarah is working really hard on our website. That should be out pretty soon. And guys, I can't wait for you guys to see it, because it's I'm going to use this word, is dope. It's really, really nice, So we can't wait for you guys to see that. So you can find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, WeNetworkNow, Instagram, Facebook, and also we have a WhatsApp group. So first, I really, really want to thank my teammates. I mean, these guys have been working, great. I mean, I don't even know, there's no vocabulary for it. During the pandemic, we were all busy with our family, but for some reason, these guys find time to help us, to see, okay, what are we going to do next? What do we need to do? Like Mohy related today is like, you have to find people that are committed to the cause. And these guys are the personification of our organization. They really, really believe in what we have been doing. So check Drame, he's not here. Medo, Ewat, Elodie, Yannick, Sarah, Afu, Bihal, thank you guys for your great work. And we have more work to do. But I'm glad that we were able to come together to build the foundation. We have the foundation here. So keep up the good work. And it's going to be challenging. It's not going to be, all flowers all the time. But if we or look at the bigger picture, meaning our mission, I believe that we'll get somewhere. I would like to thank everyone for your time today, and looking forward for another great event. Thank you, Mohy. Thank you.